Wembley Stadium, London, July 16, 1988. The night sky stretched like a vast canvas above the open-air venue, stars barely visible against the glow of stage lights that reached toward heaven like luminous fingers. 90,000 souls packed the legendary stadium to capacity, creating a sea of humanity that rippled with anticipation. This was the third of Michael Jackson's 5 sold-out London shows during his Bad World Tour, a tour that had already broken attendance record across the globe and cemented his status not just as the king of pop, but as perhaps the most commanding live performer of his generation. The air crackled with a palpable electricity, the collective energy of nearly 100,000 people focused on a single point, the elaborate stage where, any moment now, Michael Jackson would appear. In the darkness backstage, Michael stood motionless, eyes closed, performing his pre-show ritual of silent meditation. At 30 years old, he had been performing for 24 of those years, nearly his entire life spent in the unrelenting glare of the public eye. Yet still, before every show, he felt the flutter of anticipation in his chest, the sacred nervous energy that he had come to recognize not as fear, but as respect for the moment, for the audience, for the privilege of performance itself. His breath came in measured counts. In for 4, hold for 4, release for 4. The familiar weight of the elaborate gold and black military-style jacket settled on his slender shoulders, the material stiff with intricate embroidery and metalwork. The single crystal-studded glove encased his right hand like a second skin. He was ready. Around him, dancers stretched, backup singers vocalized quietly, technicians spoke in hushed tones into headsets. The machine of a Michael Jackson production, over 100 people working in perfect synchronization, hummed with quiet efficiency. 2 minutes, Michael, his stage manager murmured, careful not to disturb his pre-performance focus. Michael opened his eyes and nodded once, the movement barely perceptible. His gaze, so soft and gentle in private moments, had already begun its transformation into the laser-sharp focus of the performer. The boundary between Michael Jackson, the person, and Michael Jackson, the performer, was dissolving, as it did before every show, the shy, soft-spoken man receding to make way for the electrifying presence that would soon command the attention of 90,000 people. 1 minute. The final countdown had begun. Michael moved toward his position beneath the stage, where a hydraulic lift would propel him upward for his dramatic entrance. As he passed his personal assistant, he paused briefly. "Remember to check on those children from the hospital," he said quietly. "Make sure they have everything they need." Earlier that day, Michael had arranged for 20 children from London's Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital, all battling serious illnesses, to attend a concert, provided with the best seats in the house and a private meet and greet before the show. It was the kind of gesture he made in every city, often without publicity or fanfare, driven by a genuine connection to children that transcended the usual celebrity charity work. The assistant nodded. "Already done. They're in place, and they're beyond excited." A subtle smile softened Michael's features momentarily before the mask of performance descended once more. He stepped onto the platform that would lift him onto the stage, took one final centering breath, and gave the signal. "Ready." The stadium lights dimmed, plunging the massive space into darkness. 90,000 voices raised in anticipation, the sound rolling like a wave across the stadium. Then, a single spotlight pierced the blackness, illuminating an empty microphone stand at center stage. The crowd's roar intensified, building, a tsunami of sound crashing against the stage. Suddenly, in a burst of pyrotechnics and light, the platform rose from beneath the stage, revealing Michael Jackson in a tableau of perfect stillness. Head down, 1 foot forward, poised like a coiled spring of potential energy waiting to be released. For 3 full seconds, he held the pose, allowing the moment to build, understanding intuitively the power of anticipation. The crowd's response was deafening, physical, a wall of sound so powerful it seemed to compress the very air. Then, precisely on cue with the opening notes of "Wanna Be Startin' Something," Michael's head snapped up, and his body exploded in emotion with such sudden, controlled violence that it triggered another wave of screams from the audience. What followed was Michael Jackson at the absolute height of his powers. Each movement executed with precision so acute it appeared both meticulously choreographed and spontaneously inevitable. Each note delivered with the perfect fusion of technical mastery and raw emotion that had become his hallmark. The opening numbers unfolded with the kind of pacing that demonstrated Michael's innate understanding of performance as storytelling. Building energy, releasing it, building it again in waves that carried the audience along an emotional journey designed with almost scientific precision. By the time he reached Smooth Criminal, roughly halfway through the show, the audience was completely in his thrall, 90,000 people moving as a single organism, responding to every gesture, every vocal inflection with a heightened awareness of a collective experiencing something extraordinary together. The song's cinematic quality translated perfectly to the massive stage, with Michael and his dancers executing the complex choreography, including the famous lean that seemed to defy the laws of physics with flawless synchronization. As the final notes of Smooth Criminal faded and the applause washed over the stage, Michael prepared for a tonal shift in the show. The next number would be Man in the Mirror, a song that transformed the electric energy of the previous performances into something more reflective, more intimate despite the massive venue. It was during this brief transition, as the stage was reset and Michael took his only short breather of the 2-hour-plus show, that something entirely unexpected occurred. From the wings of the stage, a streak of movement. At first, in the controlled chaos of a scene change, few noticed. Then suddenly there was a dog, medium-sized and shaggy. Some kind of terrier mix had somehow evaded security and staff and made its way onto the center of the massive stage. The animal looked confused, disoriented by the lights and the wall of sound coming from the audience, who were now beginning to notice the uninvited guest. A ripple of surprised laughter spread through the crowd. Backstage, security personnel froze momentarily in shock, then began to mobilize to remove the animal before it could disrupt the meticulously planned production. But before they could reach the stage, Michael himself emerged from the wings, having spotted the commotion during his brief respite. The security team hesitated, uncertain how to proceed now that their principal was approaching the unpredictable animal. Michael, seeing their confusion, held up a hand in a subtle stand-down gesture that only those who knew him well would recognize. He approached the dog slowly, his movements deliberate and gentle, a stark contrast to the explosive energy of his performance just moments before. The dog, clearly frightened, cowered slightly, tail tucked low. Michael knelt down, making himself smaller, less threatening. The massive stadium, which moments before had been a cacophony of cheers and music, fell into a curious hush. 90,000 people collectively holding their breath, watching this unexpected scene unfold. With infinite patience, Michael extended his hand, palm up, allowing the dog to catch his scent. He murmured something too soft for even the nearby microphones to catch. For a tense moment, the outcome remained uncertain. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the dog's tail began to wag. Just the slightest movement at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. It took a tentative step toward Michael, then another. With the natural instinct of an animal that can sense kindness, it closed the final distance between them and allowed Michael to gently stroke its head. A collective awe swept through the stadium, the sound rolling like a wave from the front rows to the farthest seats. But what happened next transformed an already remarkable moment into something truly extraordinary. As Michael continued to pet the now calm animal, a small detail caught his eye, a worn collar half hidden beneath the dog's shaggy fur. Gently, he turned the tag to read it. His expression, visible on the massive video screens that flanked the stage, changed subtly, a flicker of recognition, then something deeper, more emotional. He glanced toward the wings, catching the eye of his stage manager, and made a small motion with his free hand, a request for his wireless microphone, which was swiftly brought to him. Still kneeling beside the dog, who now sat contentedly against his leg, Michael addressed the audience, his voice soft, yet carrying clearly through the stadium's sophisticated sound system. "I believe," he said, "this little one belongs to someone here tonight." There was a puzzled murmur from the crowd, uncertainty about where this unplanned interlude was heading. "The tag says his name is Charlie," Michael continued, his voice warm with gentle amusement. "And he belongs to—" He paused, reading the tag again. "Sophie Taylor, row 10, seat 25. The crowd's response was immediate, heads turning toward the designated seat, a spotlight swiftly directed by the quick-thinking lighting crew. And there, illuminated in the beam, was a little girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, her face a mask of astonishment and mounting joy. She half rose from her seat, mouth open in shock, clearly torn between propriety and the desperate desire to reclaim her pet. Later, it would emerge that Sophie was one of the children from Great Ormond Street Hospital whom Michael had arranged to attend the concert. Charlie was her therapy dog, who had somehow slipped away from the well-intentioned hospital volunteer supervising the group and had, with the uncanny instinct of devoted pets, somehow found his way to the stage, as if drawn to the very person who had made this special night possible for his young owner. What Michael did next was entirely unplanned, unscripted, and ultimately unforgettable. He stood, whispered something to his stage manager, then addressed the audience again. "I think," he said with that gentle, slightly mischievous smile that so rarely appeared in public settings, "Charlie and Sophie should have the best seat in the house for the next song." A murmur of surprise and delight rippled through the crowd. With a small gesture from Michael, a security team member gently approached Sophie's seat and escorted her, wide-eyed with disbelief, toward the stage. When she reached the steps, Michael himself walked over and extended his hand to help her up, Charlie already trotting happily toward his owner. Their reunion was beautiful in its simplicity, the little girl dropping to her knees, arms thrown around the dog's neck, face buried in his fur. When she looked up at Michael, her eyes shone with tears of relief and gratitude. What the audience couldn't hear was the brief exchange between them. "Thank you for finding Charlie," Sophie said, her voice barely audible even to Michael. "He found me," Michael replied with gentle humor. Then, noticing how her small body trembled with emotion, and perhaps with the effects of her illness, he added softly, "Are you warm enough out here?" Sophie nodded bravely, but Michael had already signaled to an assistant, who swiftly brought his iconic silver and black jacket from the Billie Jean number, the most recognizable piece of clothing in pop culture at that time. With a flourish that delighted the crowd, Michael draped it around Sophie's tiny shoulders, the garment engulfing her like a glittering tent. The audience's response was explosive, applause and cheers mixing with audible sounds of emotion, the collective of 90,000 people witnessing an act of spontaneous kindness. But Michael wasn't finished. He knelt down to Sophie's eye level, a posture familiar to those who had observed his interactions with children, always careful to meet them as equals rather than looming over them with adult authority. "Would you and Charlie like to stay right here for this next song?" he asked. Sophie's face transformed with wonder, eyes widening in disbelief at the offer. She nodded, apparently too overwhelmed to speak. Michael smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile rarely captured on camera, and turned to address the audience once more. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice taking on a new warmth, "I'd like to dedicate this next song to Sophie, to Charlie, and to all the brave children at Great Ormond Street Hospital who are teaching all of us about courage, about hope, and about love." As if on cue, though it was entirely unplanned, the opening notes of Man in the Mirror began to play. But rather than taking center stage, as the choreography called for, Michael guided Sophie and Charlie to a small area just off-center, where a stagehand had already placed a comfortable chair. He helped Sophie into it, made sure she and Charlie were settled, then stepped back to begin the song. What followed transcended even the high standard Michael had set for emotional performances. Perhaps inspired by Sophie's presence, perhaps touched by the serendipity of the moment, He delivered man in the mirror with a raw vulnerability rarely witnessed in a stadium setting. His voice soared and broke and soared again, infusing the lyrics about making a change with an urgent sincerity that reached even the farthest seats. Throughout the performance, he would occasionally turn towards Sophie and Charlie, including them in the moment, acknowledging their presence without making them the spectacle. The child sat wide-eyed, the oversized jacket slipping off one shoulder, her hand buried in Charlie's fur, watching with the pure, unfiltered appreciation that only children can fully express. By the time the song reached its powerful bridge, the atmosphere in the stadium had transformed. This was no longer simply a concert, no longer merely entertainment. It had become something else entirely, a moment of genuine human connection magnified by the shared witness of 90,000 people. As Michael's voice rose for the final chorus, something remarkable happened throughout Wembley Stadium. It began in the front rows and spread outward like ripples in a pond. People raising their lighters and phones, creating a galaxy of lights that stretched as far as the eye could see. Hardened music critics would later admit to finding themselves inexplicably moved to tears. Security personnel, focused and professional throughout the show, wiped discreetly at their eyes. By the song's conclusion, there was hardly a dry eye in the stadium. 90,000 people united not just by music, but by the spontaneous moment of compassion they had witnessed. If this story moves you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more moments that define the king of pop's extraordinary journey. As the final notes faded, Michael turned to Sophie and extended his hand. Together, with Charlie trotting happily beside them, they took center stage. The applause was thunderous, a physical force that seemed to make the very foundations of Wembley Stadium tremble. Michael bowed, then gently encouraged Sophie to do the same. Shyly at first, then with growing confidence, she managed a small curtsy, nearly disappearing in the enormous jacket that engulfed her small frame. The crowd's response intensified, the sound rolling across the stadium in waves. After escorting Sophie and Charlie safely offstage, where they would watch the remainder of the concert from the wings, an experience Sophie would later describe as the best night of my whole entire life, Michael returned to complete the show. Though he performed the remaining numbers with his usual technical brilliance, something had shifted in the atmosphere. The barrier between performer and audience, already more permeable in Michael's shows than in those of most superstars, had thinned further. What had been witnessed wasn't just virtuosity, but humanity, not just talent, but compassion. In the days that followed, the story of Sophie, Charlie, and Michael spread rapidly. Newspaper headlines proclaimed, "King of Pop becomes King of Hearts," and a different kind of thriller. Jackson's impromptu ACT of kindness. The moment, captured on thousands of personal cameras and the official concert video, became one of the most shared and discussed segments of the entire Bad Tour. But there was more to the story, a private epilogue that wouldn't emerge until years later. The day after the concert, before leaving for his next tour stop, Michael arranged for a substantial anonymous donation to be made to Great Ormond Street Hospital, specifically directed toward their pet therapy program. Additionally, he had his team deliver a custom-made miniature replica of his Billie Jean jacket to Sophie, sized perfectly for Charlie, complete with tiny crystal details and a note that read simply, "To Charlie, the only other superstar allowed on my stage. With love, Michael." Sophie Taylor would go on to make a full recovery from her illness, later becoming a veterinarian specializing in therapy animals. In interviews, she would credit that night at Wembley and Michael's spontaneous kindness as the moment that showed her how much of a difference a single act of compassion can make in someone's life. Charlie lived to the respectable age of 15, and throughout his life, on special occasions, he would wear his custom-made Michael Jackson jacket, a tangible reminder of the night when an unplanned moment of human connection moved 90,000 people to tears. Years later, long after Michael's untimely passing, a small display in a Michael Jackson museum would house both jackets, the full-sized one worn by Sophie that night, and Charlie's miniature replica, along with a photograph of Sophie, now an adult, standing beside them. The accompanying plaque would quote Michael's own words from an interview he gave about the incident. "People ask me about my favorite moments on stage. They expect me to talk about the moonwalk or some big production number. But honestly, it's moments like that night with Sophie and Charlie, moments of real, unplanned human connection, that matter most. Everything else is just performance." For the thousands of visitors who pause at this display each year, it serves as a reminder that beyond the breathtaking talent, beyond the record-breaking albums and revolutionary videos, beyond the moonwalk and the glove and all the trappings of unprecedented fame, there existed a human being of extraordinary compassion, a man whose greatest gift may not have been his music, but his heart. Visitors to the museum often remark on the same detail. How? In the concert footage that plays alongside the display, Michael's smile as he helps Sophie take her bow appears different from his stage smile. Unguarded, genuinely joyful, almost childlike in its openness. It is perhaps the most authentic glimpse many fans would ever get of the private person behind the public persona. A reminder that sometimes, in the most unexpected moments, the boundary between icon and individual dissolves, revealing the simple humanity that connects us all. If you've been moved by this glimpse into one of the most heartwarming moments of Michael's career, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Together, we keep alive not just the memory of Michael's unparalleled talent, but the spirit of compassion that informed his greatest moments. When Sophie Taylor opened her veterinary practice, specializing in therapy animals, she named it Charlie's Place. Above the reception desk hangs a photograph of a tiny dog in a crystal-studded jacket, sitting proudly beside a kneeling Michael Jackson on the enormous stage of Wembley Stadium. Beneath it, a simple caption reads, "The night that taught me what it means to make a difference in someone's life." It serves as a daily reminder to her, and to all who enter, that sometimes the most profound acts of kindness occur not according to plan, but in those unexpected moments when we're given the opportunity to show who we truly are. And in those moments, even the biggest stars reveal themselves not through their talent, but through their humanity.